You know how much women athletes get paid? Ali Riley is captain of both the New Zealand national women's team and an LA-based national women's soccer league team. Riley spoke up about the wage gap and told Marketing Brew that most pro-women athletes can't make enough money to make a living, save money, plan for retirement, invest money, or buy property, and that getting supplemental income is a necessity.
Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox with BASEDPolitics, and you're watching my show, Hannah Explains It All, where every week I help you better understand the political and economic things happening around you. I don't know about you guys, but I would consider myself officially Caitlyn curious. I watched women's basketball for probably the first time ever yesterday. I tuned in for the basketball championship where USC squared off against Iowa, and I will admit I tuned in because of Caitlyn Clark. I am officially curious. If you're not following, she has been absolutely blowing up in recent months. More people are watching women's basketball than probably ever before, and it's almost entirely due to her. She is expected to be the #1 female draft in the nation, and the team where most people think she will end up, which is Indiana, has already seen their ticket sales skyrocket in anticipation of that decision. But because of all of this attention on Caitlyn, a very familiar debate has been stirring once again, which is around how female athletes are paid, particularly how they're paid in comparison to men.
Yeah, of course, people will always say, oh, are men and women equal? Sure. But when it has to come down to a check or, actually putting your money where your mouth is, I think that's a little bit different conversation. That's a little bit harder.
So to kick off this discussion, I think it's first important to admit that yes, female athletes are paid significantly less than their male counterparts almost every time you look into it. There are very few outliers in this whole equation. The outliers that do exist, you know well. They're people like Simone Biles, Serena Williams, but you know these names because they are extreme outliers. They're some of the few women in their respective sports who are making millions and millions of dollars. For most female athletes, though, when you start digging into the numbers, they're making well under 6 figures, and many of them even work second or third jobs to make ends meet. Now, often when this discussion comes up, it's painted as part of a larger problem where people try to say that women as a whole are paid less than men. There's this gender pay gap across the country. For every dollar a man makes, women make 69 cents. And this has been debunked ad nauseum, but it persists. I, in particular, have spent a good bit of time debunking this entire narrative and pointing to data that shows the opposite.
Our pay gap is entirely made up. It has been illegal to pay women less than men since 1963. 1963. So if a woman is getting paid less than a man at her job and she has the same education, same qualifications, it is illegal. She can go to battle against that company. It's not happening. They use statistics basically comparing the average that all men make versus the average that all women make, and they try to say, look, there's a difference in how much women make. No, there's a difference in the kinds of jobs women choose to go into that happen to be mostly lower paying jobs than men. There's a difference in the type of work women look for. They tend to want things like remote work, and they tend to want to work less hours. They are more likely to take time away from the workforce than men. All of these things are why they make less on average than men. If you actually dig into the numbers and compare apples to apples, when women and men are in the same jobs, have the same experience, same time the job, same qualifications, they are not paid less. And in fact, I think the averages actually show women make a couple pennies more than men in those scenarios. So all of this is made up, and I think it's utterly absurd.
As I mentioned in that clip, it has been illegal to pay women less than men for equal work since 1963. That's thanks to a piece of legislation called the Equal Pay Act. And it does note within it that the jobs don't have to be identical, but if they are substantially equal, not based on title, but based on actual components of the work and its demands, then it is illegal to pay women less than men when all things are equal. The gender pay gap is a popular talking point, especially on the left, I think, because they want people to feel like victims. If you feel like a victim, you are more likely to think that you need a savior, then you are more likely to look for the government to come in and be that savior, so you're much more okay with a very large government. And many women, when they're presented with these facts, just take them at face value and never investigate them further. Anecdotally, they look around. It does seem like most men around them are making more money, and so they just accept that this is true and that women are discriminated against and paid less. But in reality, what's actually happening is women are simply making very different choices in the workplace than men are. They are picking different jobs. They tend to pick jobs that have more of a work-life balance, that have shorter hours, that are more flexible. They take time away from the workplace. They have children. They give up years of experience in that process. Oftentimes, women are not negotiating on their own behalf. We have research showing that women are less likely to ask for a raise or negotiate tough when it comes time to talk to their boss about their pay. All of these things add up, and as a whole, women do make less money than men in this country, but it's not because they're doing equal work or in the exact same jobs. When we do look at that apples to apples comparison, and you do have women with the same experience, same types of education and degrees, same qualifications, and in the same kinds of roles as men, they are not being paid less than men. That is simply not happening. Now, when I point this out, I often have people on the left say, well, why are these jobs that women tend to pick paid less? Why are nurses and teachers not paid very well? And they tend to have this impression that basically because these fields are dominated by women, they're undervalued and therefore underpaid. That's not really how value is calculated in the real world. Value in the business world, in the free market, is calculated based on the amount of profit you're bringing in. If the job that you're in is not bringing in as much profit, aka value, it's not going to be valued as much. You're not going to make as much of a salary in that kind of position. So when you look at nurses versus doctors, nurses are very important. They certainly do create value, but they are not the biggest value add when it comes to a hospital or a doctor's office. You still have to have the doctor that's there for them to work under. Now, there are things that we could do to alleviate some of these discrepancies. I'm really in favor of laws that say things like nurse practitioners can administer a lot more services without a doctor being present. That means, one, that you have a greater supply for people. Many of the services they're providing, they do have the training for. They don't necessarily need a doctor sitting there right there with them to watch their every move. That would allow the amount that you have to pay for services to come down, but it also would ensure they could make more money because they wouldn't have to be so tightly tied to a doctor and their schedule. But when you look at things like teachers aren't in the real world. They're mostly working for the government. They're mostly working for a system that lacks incentives, that lacks competition, and therefore so does their pay structure. I'd also argue they're working in a field that has stagnated. The value add that they are bringing to the table has gone down in recent years. We continue to see students have worse and worse outcomes in public schools. So it's pretty tough to say that they need a raise in their pay. I don't really think there's much actual data to back up the notion that these fields are paid less because they're dominated by women. I think they're paid less because of the nature of the value they create. I also think when you look at the explanations for why women tend to make less, there is a societal problem. Again, women are choosing to take time away from the workforce to become mothers, to be in the home. They're looking for jobs with more flexible schedules. They don't want to be at the office long hours. I think that's all perfectly justifiable, but life always has trade-offs. And so if you are opting into those kinds of careers, you can expect to be paid less because, again, the amount of value you're creating is going to go down compared to somebody who's willing to work 8-9 hour plus days. I think what really should be happening for women, if they say this is unfair, all of these things are getting dumped onto us, we're the ones that have to take time away to be mothers, we're the ones that have to take care of the households. You are right. That is unfair. It is sexist, but it is not a problem the government can fix. It's a problem you can fix in your negotiation with your husbands or your partners about who's going to pick up the load, who's going to do the bulk of the child rearing. That doesn't have to fall on your shoulders. It's just that you're allowing it to. So I think people need to remember they have agency in these conversations and take responsibility in their own lives if they want to fix some of these problems holistically. The government cannot solve every issue that exists in society. When it comes to the more niche subject that I want to focus on today, which is female athletes and their pay, I would say that at first glance, it does appear you might have a situation where women are being paid less for equal work. These athletes are doing pretty much the same job as their male counterparts, and yet they are paid substantially less. Let's look at some of the data. This is data according from a site called getnux.org, and the first stat they report is that the average gender pay gap in sports is around 13%, with men earning more on average than women. 2019, the total prize money for FIFA Women's World Cup was $30 million, while the 2018 FIFA Men's World Cup prize money was $400 million. Also note that the highest paid female athlete, Naomi Osaka, made $37.4 million in 2020, whereas the highest paid male athlete, Roger Federer, made $106.3 million. Go on to note the average WNBA player earns a base salary of around $75,000, while the average NBA player earns $7.7 million. 2019, the U.S. women's national soccer team received $4 million for winning the World Cup, while the men's team received $38 million in 2018. Go on to note the gender pay gap in professional golf is 83%. Tennis, the combined earnings of the top 10 women is 76% of the combined earnings of the top 10 men. And they say women receive about 17% of the total sponsorships available in North American professional sports. Now, these are just a few of the stats. They keep going. You can dig into the charts. I'll put it in the sources. I thought it was pretty fascinating, but very clearly, there is a huge difference in how women and men are paid in sports. Now, I think the knee-jerk response here is probably the most common one, which is they generate less value. Fewer people watch women's sports, fewer people attend. games when women are playing. They probably are less likely to buy things from female athletes. And all of this ends up with them having far lower salaries than their male counterparts.
I saw a woman a couple months back, professional soccer player, right? She goes on to ESPN or one of these sports channels, and she starts bitching, going like, I don't understand, how come female athletes don't make as much as male professional athletes, right? And all of these men had to sit there and act like they didn't know what the answer was. They had to sit there like dumbfounded, like, oh, I don't know. Why is that? That is a conundrum. I have no idea. Literally, I'm sitting at home screaming at the TV because you don't sell any fucking tickets. Nobody is going to women's soccer games. You're playing in a 20,000 seat arena. 1,500 people show up. That's not a good night. The promoter lost his ass on that gig.
Now, I think that comedians' reaction to this conversation is probably the most common one, and it's pretty hard to refute. But I think in fairness to this discussion, we need to dig into why women's sports generate so much less money than men. Because does that point to a larger issue in society where people have sexist attitudes towards female athletes? And when I started digging into this, I have to be honest, I think the answer is probably. It has a lot to do with it. But it's not just the owners of these teams or the associations that they're part of that are the culprits. One of the biggest problems that's facing women in sports is the media. And I always think this is really interesting where like you see the left call out an issue and they harp on it and they harp on it and they harp on it. And then you start digging into it and then you find out the bad guy is Democrats on the left because Democrats control the media. And what's interesting is that the media determines a lot of the money that people in athletics make. In fact, broadcast rights make up the biggest share of revenue for major sports teams in the United States. According to a University of Southern California and Purdue University study, 95% of total television sports coverage in 2019 focused on men's sports. Another study in 2021 by the NCAA analyzed March Madness tournaments, and they found that broadcast rights for the women's teams were undervalued by millions. And what's interesting about this is that, yes, fewer people follow women's sports, but also it's sort of a chicken and egg issue. Would more people follow women's sports if they could easily and readily watch them, if they were hyped on TV, if everybody was watching them on ESPN on a given night? Probably. This other study went on to note that even though fewer people watched the final for women's college basketball between 2015 and 2021, total viewers for the women's final increased by 32% during that time, while for men, it actually declined by 40%. A 2021 white paper for YouGov surveyed reasons why viewers around the world don't engage with women's sports as much, and they found that the top reasons were 1, less media coverage, 2, lack of knowledge of the teams and athletes, and 3, limited marketing. And this is why I think you're seeing such a phenomenon happen around Caitlyn Clark right now. It's been so fascinating to me to watch because my fiance is super into basketball. He plays basketball weekly. A lot of his friends are very into basketball. And his entire male group chat has been freaking out about Caitlyn Clark over the past week. And he doesn't even know what to make of it. He's like, they've never mentioned women's sports once. They've never said a single word about any female basketball games or competitions that are going on. And now they're like obsessing. But it's because somebody finally broke through the echo chamber. This female athlete was so good, she started to actually get media attention. And now that the media is giving her a lot of coverage, guess what? People are interested. People who never thought about watching women's sports before all of a sudden are because there is a storyline for them to tune into. And I really don't think there's a very good free market explanation for why these media companies have been so uninterested in women's sports. Women control the purchasing power in American households. That's why most commercials and products are marketed towards women. Products that are made specifically for women blow up. Look at the Barbie movie phenomenon last year. It was absolute mayhem. Hollywood made one movie that was actually genuinely interested in women and their issues, and it became a billion-dollar blockbuster. Furthermore, if you look at athletics across the globe, there's not really any indicators that this is a phenomenon you see in other countries. Many of our female athletes in the United States actually go and play sports overseas in their off seasons because they can make a ton more money doing so in other countries. That's how you got the whole Brittany Griner problem when she got arrested in Russia. Many people were like, why is she in Russia when she plays basketball in the United States? She was in Russia because she can make a pretty good paycheck over there but she can't make a good paycheck here for the exact same thing. Also, look at things like the Olympics. When you watch the Olympics, people are equally interested in both men and female divisions. Female gymnastics, female figure skating are amongst the most popular sports. So what indication is there for these companies that people would not be interested in female sports and other divisions? One last study I found pertained to tennis, where they said among the 10 highest paid female athletes in 2018, 9 were tennis players. And they think that that's because tennis tends to get more equal coverage across men's and women's divisions in the United States. I think another unfair part of this response of like, well, female athletes generate less money, so they deserve to get paid less, is that they're not really asking for an apples to apples comparison for pay. If you really dig into their issues about how they're being paid, it's more about percentage points.
We are not asking to get paid what the men get paid. We're asking to get paid the same percentage of revenue. Do you know what I'm saying?
Got it. So that's a huge misconception.
That's a huge misconception. In the NBA, they have percentages of revenue shared for the players, right? So jersey sales, their TV contracts, but that's because their CBA negotiates. You know, if the owners are making certain types of money, they get that as well. In the WNBA, that's not the case.
For sure.
Yeah, because every video is like, oh, this person gets paid this person gets paid that, right?
So I want to be really clear about that. Like, I don't think I should get paid the same as LeBron.
Right.
But the percentage of revenue, like, for example, they sell my jersey in Mandalay Bay, I don't get a dime.
You don't get any money from jersey sales?
That's crazy.
That's
so, like, that's the stuff we're talking about.
Sure,
you know what I'm saying?
As that athlete says, she's not asking to get paid what LeBron James gets paid. She's not unrealistic. She doesn't have these goals of being paid some crazy sum based on the value that she's bringing in. I think what it seems like they want is simply fair contracts where they get paid the same percentage of sales and revenue that they do bring in. Now, because these issues have been reaching a fever pitch in recent years, we have seen some policy changes and also just some industry changes to address the problems. And I think that some of this is very encouraging. In late 2022, Congress actually passed the Equal Pay for Team USA law, ensuring that women playing for international teams must make the same as men. I do find this very ironic that they stipulated this for other countries and didn't have much to say about the United States. But again, it's actually already the law in the United States. It just seems that it's not being enforced all that well sometimes. And a good reminder to anybody, if you do find yourself in the situation, not that it's a pleasant recourse, but you do have one. You can always sue if you are being underpaid as a woman and all other conditions are equal. Also in 2023, the Women's Tennis Association announced there would be equal prize money offered to both male and female athletes at more competitions, including the Grand Slam tournaments. We've also seen a huge boom in licensing in recent years, and this is both for professional athletes and college ones. This is probably one of the most transformative things on the table when it comes to how athletes are paid, particularly for female athletes, where we have seen numerous women on college sporting teams start to garner millions of followers online and get national brand deals, Caitlyn Clark included. According to Forbes, the most marketable tennis players made 4 times as much from endorsements and appearance fees as they did from prize money over the last year. And this is actually pretty common. Like, yes, salaries are higher for male athletes from their actual teams and associations, but the richest amongst most athletes are usually getting it from really good endorsement and licensing deals. That's always been the case. There just simply is a lot more money in marketing products for people than there is in playing a sport. And lastly, when it comes to women's soccer, where it seems there has been the biggest outcry over these issues in recent years due to the popularity of women's soccer, but also due to the success of the American team in recent years, many of the players started to speak out very openly against their association and even brought a lawsuit alleging they had been unequally paid. Now, they actually filed this lawsuit a few years ago, and at the time, the New York Times wrote, "The case is a bit murkier for the U.S. women's national soccer team, which is on the prowl for a second straight World Cup title and faces Spain tomorrow after sweeping its 3 pool play matches. The team filed a complaint against U.S. Soccer in March that states female players would earn a maximum of $99,000 or $4,950 per game, while similarly situated male players would earn an average of $263,320 or $13,166 per game. The players claim they face discrimination when it comes to where and how often they play, how they train and travel, the medical treatment and coaching they receive, and obviously their salaries. The U.S. women's soccer team's games have generated more revenue than the men's teams over the past 3 years, according to a review by the Wall Street Journal. Fox Sports says the pool play game versus Chile had record viewership for a Women's World Cup group stage match. U.S. Soccer appears to have gotten the message, and the two will pursue mediation after the World Cup to resolve the gender discrimination lawsuit instead of going to a courtroom. Now, in 2022, the women's team did end up settling that lawsuit against their bosses at U.S. Soccer, and it was a settlement that included a multi-million-dollar payment to the players and a promise by the federation to equalize pay between the men and women's national teams. Under the terms of the agreement, the women, a group of several dozen and current and former players that include some of the world's most popular and decorated athletes, will share $24 million in payments from U.S. Soccer. The bulk of that figure is back pay, a tacit admission that compensation for the men's and women's teams had been unequal for years. So these are really interesting and I would say promising developments. Women should be paid equal pay for equal work, and it really does seem like there has been some major discrimination happening in sports for some time. Certainly, I think people have to be realistic about this, and if you ultimately want to see these women make the same kind of money as men, then you need to put your money where your mouth is and actually start supporting women's sports. You need to buy tickets, you need to go to games, you need to buy merchandise, you need to buy products that they're hawking. All of this would contribute to them ultimately making more money off of their sport. So my final verdict is that while the gender pay gap is mostly a myth in this country and isn't usually very true at all, when it comes to women's sports, it kind of has been, and it's time for some stuff to change. Particularly when it comes to the media and how they hype these women's sports. If they want them to get paid equally, they want them to make more money, then they also need to put their money where their mouth is and actually broadcast their games, promote them, and generate interest so that people can learn to follow it and start to adapt to the culture. That's what we saw with men's soccer in the United States. It really only became popular here a number of years ago. It wasn't played that broadly here. We didn't have our own teams for some time. When they first started trying to integrate it in the United States, there wasn't a ton of interest. But over the past decade or so, we've seen that massively turn around. Now we have soccer teams, including in places like Atlanta, where I live, that have rabid fan bases that are selling out stadiums that are performing quite well. The same thing can happen with women in their sports, but it's going to take some intentionality. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until then, I'll see you next week. Actually, wait. No, I won't. I won't see you next week. I will be out of the country on vacation. So you'll get this episode this week. We'll skip next Saturday, and then I'll be back in business after that. If you like this video, don't forget to check out others in my series. Hannah Explains It All here. And you can check out my weekly show on women's issues, Histrionics, here.